Hey everybody and welcome to Vlogmas. It is episode 20 and with just a few days to go I wanted to do a review of all of the Marvel things that came out during 2023 as I would normally do when it gets to the end of each year. I'm not going to review absolutely everything that came out from Marvel Studios this year, mostly because I haven't seen everything yet, mainly the Marvels which came out fairly recently and I've not yet seen, which I think is it says something in itself in the fact that I've not been that desperate to go and watch it. But anyway, that aside, we'll review everything else in this video. So we start off with Ant-Man Quantumania, and to be perfectly honest, this movie seems to get a lot of hate and I don't really understand why. I didn't think it was that bad. It was okay, it was fairly watchable. It's not like the biggest standout thing that Marvel Studios have ever made, but you could say that about a number of things that they've done, including all of the Ant-Man movies. I think my only real issue that I do understand with this particular one is simply that the main kind of big villain who's supposed to be the big bad of this entire saga is so easily defeated in the end by an army of ants. But then, you know, to be honest, I think I'd probably be quite easily defeated by an army of ants. So you can kind of see that there is a bit of an argument there. If he's supposed to be this huge, great big villain that's so mighty and powerful and all the rest of it, that he is very, in the end, easily kind of beaten by Ant-Man and his army of ants. So I can understand that argument, but if you put that to one side, I kind of feel like the rest of the movie wasn't actually that bad. I quite liked seeing the quantum realm. It really wasn't what I imagined it to be, and obviously it's a very heavy CGI movie because of that, but I don't think it necessarily suffers for it. The CGI itself isn't that bad. In fact, I'd say it was pretty good. So I don't really see why everybody was making such a big deal out of it, other than the issues with Kang being so easily beaten. But then having said that, it's not like he kind of gets killed off or anything in the end. He just kind of gets pushed out into some other reality or dimension. You don't actually see him end as such. So it kind of stands to reason that there would have been an opportunity for him to have come back and he could have been even bigger and more powerful and probably more pent up with vengeance on his mind to come back as an even bigger villain in another movie later on down the line. Now obviously there's issues now with that character because of Jonathan Majors, as we spoke about yesterday, but if we park that for a second, there would have been an opportunity, I think, for more Kang variants to kind of come out. We saw them all at the end of the movie at the post-credit scene, and they're all lined up there looking now to kind of create what will be, I imagine, Secret Wars, or at least the invasion of all of these Kang variants across the multiverse. So I didn't think it was all that bad. It was okay, but I will say though that on the downside, it's a very forgettable movie, and if you think about it, I've no desire to actually rewatch it or see it again. I've seen it a couple of times, once actually in the cinema and I think once at home, and I'm in no particular rush to kind of watch it again, which isn't a particularly good sign for a Marvel movie or show, that there's no desire to kind of rewatch it and kind of go through it again. So from that point of view, yeah, I'd say it was very kind of mid as an actual movie, but by no means is it the worst thing that the MCU has ever produced, but similarly it isn't the best either. So it was okay. It just about kind of scrapes through for this year as being an all right thing, because there are other things that came out that I think were a lot worse. So in my opinion, it's not that bad. I don't think it deserves the hate that a lot of people do give it. So yeah, it's all right. It's okay. So then we move on to Secret Invasion, which came out on Disney+. And if I'm being honest, I would probably put this as being one of the worst things that came out from Marvel Studios this year, because it was so unbelievably boring. I had to force myself to keep watching this show. It really wasn't interesting. I didn't think anyone's performance in it was particularly good. It wasn't a storyline that kind of drew me in any particular way. The villain was all right, but I kind of just couldn't get to grips with it in the slightest, and there was just nothing exciting or interesting about it. Even the actual opening of the series, and spoiler alert, I will give this away. 3, 2, 1. Maria Hill gets killed very early on in the series. So they kind of built her up in all of the trailers as being like a main character throughout the show. And then she's gone after episode 1. And it's a character that they killed off, I think, for some kind of emotional impact. But you don't have that with that character because who cares about Maria Hill? I mean, really. So you kind of get this feeling that they wanted to kind of give you this big emotional death of a character, and it just doesn't really work because it isn't a character that anybody's got any kind of emotional attachment to, unlike, say, the characters that had gone in Endgame where you really, really felt it. With this, it was a bit like, oh, all right, well, now they've just killed off someone else. So it kind of lost that emotional impact. And then everything that happens after that is just really, really boring. And also, I have to be honest, Samuel L. Jackson's performance I didn't think was particularly great. I kind of felt like he was making the character even more dull throughout the whole thing. And the whole kind of thing when you get to the end where they're creating what is essentially like super soldiers that have the ability to kind of perform every possible superpower that every Avenger and every villain and every character in the MCU has had, I kind of felt like it was a bit over the top, very gimmicky. Arguably, that now creates the most powerful being in the entire Marvel universe, which falls a little bit flat when it's in such a boring show. Yeah, arguably, if they've now got the ability of every hero and villain that's ever been in the MCU, they should be awesome and they should be incredible. And they're just not. The characters don't really work. The plot was really dull. Yeah, as I said, I really, really had to force myself to watch this, which is such a shame because I felt like it could have been really good. Personally, I think that by having it as a show maybe doesn't really work because I felt like Secret Invasion and its storyline would have been a lot better as an overriding arc throughout a saga. Like the Infinity Saga and the Infinity Stones were spread out over 10, 20 movies, it would have been a lot more interesting for the Secret Invasion storyline out of the comic books that have been stretched over a series of films where you didn't really know if the characters that you were seeing were themselves or if they were Skrulls pretending to be them. That would have been a lot better way to have actually dealt with that storyline. So I kind of felt like they'd pushed it out into a show and into a series as a bit of a rush job, not particularly well written, definitely not interesting, very much not engaging, and as a result it very much falls flat because it could have been potentially so much more interesting. It should have been a huge, great big saga, in my opinion, to have dealt with the Skrulls and the Secret Invasion storyline. I mean, it was an entire arc of comic books that spanned comic after comic after comic of all of these different Skrulls coming and pretending to be Avengers, and it would have just been so much more interesting to have had that as a major, major, major storyline across multiple movies and shows throughout the thing. So instead, we've got Kang the Conqueror, which, let's be honest, that was a mistake. So I feel like the ball was dropped with Secret Invasion. It could have been absolutely brilliant, and instead it's just completely boring. So major, major fail in my opinion. Next up after that though, we have what was the best thing that came out in 2023, which was Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. Now, arguably, this wasn't itself completely flawless, but it was definitely, in my opinion, the best thing that came out in this year. There were a couple of downsides to it, and I've heard other people say similar things, so I know it's not just my imagination. If you are somebody that doesn't have a particularly high tolerance for animal cruelty, it's a very tough watch. And I must admit, even I at times found myself kind of watching this thinking, I'm really not liking this and not sure if I can kind of carry on watching, because there are some really emotional and upsetting scenes. But if you can kind of persevere with it and get through that and get over that kind of emotional part of it, it actually then turns out into a really good film. You just kind of have to bear with it and go through those tough kind of emotional scenes where you have a really young Rocket Raccoon who is being just treated really badly, and it's very upsetting and quite difficult to watch at times. If you can get through that, it's not too bad. But actually, on the flip side of that, you have to kind of give credit to Marvel Studios for the CGI work that they did, bearing in mind that you're getting emotional over an animal that's not actually there, and then it's entirely CGI. It's a credit to them, really, that the CGI and the effects were that good, that it was that believable, and you could get that emotional about it. So it is actually award-winning now. I believe that movie has actually won some awards for its CGI and visual effects, and deservedly so. It's brilliant throughout the entire movie. But when you think about how they were able to draw you in and get you so emotional about a CGI character, well, that just tells you everything. So if you can kind of get over that, it does then turn into a really good film. The CGI is excellent and the storyline is okay. I don't think that any Guardians content since the first movie has ever been that great. Volume 1 kind of set the tone, and that was one of my favourite films that Marvel have ever done. Volume 2 was definitely never going to reach those heights. Volume 3, I think, does a little bit better than what Volume 2 does, but it's still kind of underwhelming for Guardians, in my opinion. I felt like Guardians in Infinity War and Endgame were really good. More Infinity War, they weren't really in Endgame particularly. But certainly in Infinity War, they were quite a good... I was glad that they were there, and I really enjoyed when you had scenes with them in it. So they're still one of my favourite things throughout the MCU, but certainly Volume 2 and 3 never quite reached the heights that Volume 1 did. But that's probably to be expected, really. That's probably fair. But Volume 3 was good. I personally felt that it was a lot more enjoyable than Volume 2, and it's that same kind of James Gunn winning formula that they had with the quality music that they put in, which is very nostalgic, those kind of vibes. There was one other thing that happened in that movie that actually genuinely shocked me, and I'm still quite surprised that they've done it. And maybe someone correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty certain that that is the only, or certainly the first, and so far only, Marvel show or film that has ever had the F word used in it. I don't think that's ever happened before. And it's done in such a way which is clearly intended to be funny. But it really missed the mark, because when Star-Lord says it in the scene, it catches you off guard so much because you're not expecting it, that you spend your whole time questioning, did he really just say that? Did I really just hear that? And because you're doubting it, you've then missed the kind of comedy moment is kind of undone, because you're spending so much time questioning whether or not that actually did happen, and it did genuinely happen. So it was kind of a bit of a weird moment, and as a joke I felt like it kind of fell flat, but very odd that they kind of put that into a Marvel movie. I'm still very, very surprised, particularly bearing in mind that these are Disney products. I'm kind of shocked, really, that they were able to kind of get that over the line. I mean, we've never really even had that in the Netflix shows. So very, very strange. So when you kind of have the animal cruelty, emotionally upsetting scenes, and then this weird swearing comedy aspect of it, there were things about that movie that didn't either work or were quite difficult to cope with. Overall, I still think it was a good movie, but yeah, it certainly isn't flawless, and there were things in there where I kind of question the judgment a little bit, but overall it does work, because ultimately you do end up emotionally invested in the film. It then all does come good in the end, probably even better than I would have expected it to in terms of characters and who makes it through to the end of the movie. So overall it was good, and as I say, definitely the best thing that came out this year. So then we come on to Loki Series 2, or Season 2, and I have to say it was a little bit dull. I felt like Season 1 was a lot better, which isn't to say that Season 2 was bad in any way. I just felt like it was a little bit dragged out. The whole time shifting thing that he does throughout the series is really confusing for the first couple of episodes, because you're not really sure kind of what's going on, and being able to try to understand why it's happening, and it kind of gets a little bit lost in the context ever so slightly. So it was quite strange, and I found it personally a little bit difficult to follow because of that. You weren't really sure what you were watching. You weren't really sure what dimension or bit of time that he was supposed to be in. And once the time slipping gets kind of then under control, it starts to then get a little bit better as a series. But again, a little bit like Secret Invasion, I did find that it was a little bit drawn out. Maybe it wasn't particularly exciting at times. Certainly better than Secret Invasion by a long way. But yeah, there were just moments in there where I felt like it just wasn't peak Marvel until you get to the finale and the very, very end. And without really giving away any spoilers, I kind of feel like the way they ended it is the perfect ending for that character, that variant of Loki, to kind of call time on that character and him being in the MCU. He's in a position and in a place now where they can not have to worry about telling his story anymore. Because let's be honest, throughout the MCU, he's been killed off so many times, only to then be brought back again. And now I feel like with this particular variant, he's in a place where he's alive, and he may not be particularly happy, but you can kind of leave him there and you don't have to touch him anymore. The character is okay, he exists somewhere. If you love him, he's still alive, and you kind of don't have to really do anything more with that character. You can just leave him there. I think it's fine. And the way that it ends, I felt was the perfect kind of wrapping up of that story arc for that character and his development over the entire MCU. Now, of course, the one thing that Loki season 2 does sort of suffer with in hindsight is the involvement of Kang the Conqueror, or rather, I believe it's Victor is the name of his variant in this, which I have to admit I thought was very well portrayed by Jonathan Majors, and similarly they brought him back to kind of redo He Who Remains throughout various scenes towards the end of the show. So you're kind of looking at it through a bit of a lens now of, okay, well, you know, that's a bit of a, not a wasted character, but there's just a feeling of negativity now around the actor and that performance. I don't think it takes anything away from the show in any way, shape or form, but there's kind of just like this little mark on it now where you sort of think, well, are we going to see Kang the Conqueror again, or any variants of his again? And if you are, who's it going to be? So it's not a great way really for that particular character to kind of have to be shifted around in terms of the actor that's portraying it. But, you know, we spoke about that yesterday. Overall, though, it doesn't take anything away from the show. And I do think that it was really, really good. I was just super happy with the way that they actually ended it. And I hope that they don't do any more seasons of Loki. I think the story is done. It's been told. You could, I suppose, tell more stories about Sylvie, the other variant of Loki. But do you really need to do that? I personally don't think so. There's other characters that you can talk about, and Loki's been killed off so many times now that let's just leave the character, I think, as it is. I do get the feeling that he is going to come back, and I do think that we will see at least references to him in the upcoming What If Season 2. Obviously, I'm doing this before that comes out at the end of this week, so that will drag on into the new year, I suspect. So we'll be interested to kind of see how those stories portray, particularly because I detested Season 1 of What If. So we'll see whether or not Season 2 does it any better. I suspect not, though, to be honest with you. And there you have it. That is a wrap up of the things that came out from Marvel Studios in 2023, not including the Marvels, because I haven't seen it yet. But on that note, I think it is worth saying that I don't really want to see the Marvels. I'm just not interested in going and seeing it. I've had opportunities to go and get a ticket and go and sit in the cinema and watch it, but I've just no intent to. I don't really want to. There's nothing about that movie that interests me, and I think this is maybe where Marvel Studios is starting to suffer. Perhaps it's a case of superhero fatigue, I'm not really sure, but I kind of feel like post Endgame, whatever it is that they're bringing out is just trying to either make content for content's sake, or is telling the stories of characters who are basically the Z list of who's left, rather than what we had before where it was characters we all really loved. Now all we've got left is basically the bottom of the barrel, and it's only kind of getting worse. That's not to say that Marvel can't now start bringing out stuff which is really, really good. I just think they need to be a little bit more careful about the characters and the stories, and actually trying to do something that is living up to what Marvel Studios has always been about. And let's be honest, a lot of the stuff that's come out of late really falls short. And this goes back before even this year. Thor Love and Thunder, for example, it's not just the worst thing that Marvel have ever done, it's the worst thing I've ever seen. It's just so bad, and there should have been a lot of lessons learnt from that. I feel like sometimes Marvel Studios don't necessarily listen to the audience, because we're telling them constantly about the things that we do and don't like, and it's like, well, we don't really care, we're going to go and make a movie about this character and that character, and if you don't like it, then that's because you're anti-feminist or whatever. And that's not the case. It's just that you're telling stories of characters who are popular with such a small audience that the overall cinema audience aren't interested in seeing these things. So that's just my take on it, and to be honest, I would prefer to have quality over quantity, and I feel like Marvel perhaps need to take a little bit of a step back and look at the slate of what's coming up and think about how they could actually make it really, really good, and try not to sort of force these messages through their movies, because the audience is tired of that. I think, you know, it's all very well making political statements in films, but when it's film after film after film after film, you're just isolating your audiences. And I don't know, it's difficult because they, throughout the comics, have always had a very diverse range of characters and themes to try to appeal to everybody. But I feel like when you do that with cinema and with TV shows, you're trying to push it out onto an audience that aren't hardcore comic book fans, and that's where you'll start to suffer, because people aren't going to buy tickets to see films that they're not interested in seeing. And I feel like maybe there are a lot of issues going on, obviously, with Marvel Studios in terms of their actors. Not everybody likes who is in these movies, and some of them are obviously very controversial, so it just creates more problems. Whereas perhaps what they should be doing is just taking a step back at the moment and focusing on the quality and not the quantity. So there we go. That's just my kind of thoughts on it. I do think that Marvel Studios at the moment is not in a great place, and I think that's mostly because what they're churning out just isn't that great. And unfortunately, What If is probably not going to do anything to change my mind. But we shall see. Let's see what happens in 2024, and hopefully we'll get some much better content from Marvel. So, on that terrible disappointment, it is time to end the episode. Please do leave a comment and let me know what you think. Give the video a like if you did enjoy it, and please do subscribe. Coming up soon, we will have our Star Wars review of everything that came out in 2023, which wasn't really a lot, but we will talk about it. So please subscribe, check that video out soon, and with that said, I'll see you guys real soon.